Hi everyone, I just wanted to give you guys a quick update on what's going on and maybe give you a sense of the class and how to think about the class. I didn't want to create a particular time when we would all meet, like a synchronous time as they talk about, and you probably have heard about. It just would have been very complicated finding a time where you guys can meet and I can meet and we can all get together. Or maybe not, because most of us are stuck at home. Not all of us, obviously, but I do want to take into account anyone who's on a bizarre schedule or has other responsibilities, and I want to make sure that that's managed. So it's one of the benefits of being an online class. There was no expectation that we would have to be meeting face to face in one form or another, whether electronically or not. So it makes this process a little bit easier. But I do want to acknowledge that I know that it's very difficult for some of you, maybe all of you, especially whether you're at home or whether you're having to actually be active and be engaged and put yourself out there and then coming back and risking, or maybe you just don't feel that way and just tired of being cooped up. In either case, I do want to acknowledge that this is not easy for anybody, regardless of your feelings one way or the other. I also wanted to give you a chance to get a sense of how do I think about sociology and how you should be thinking about sociology. I'm currently sitting in my office outside. It's just too nice of a day to be indoors. Aside from the fact that there are just too many people indoors, and it makes teaching a class extremely difficult. But I do want to kind of link this to theory and thinking about it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. This is going to be short. Again, the idea is to kind of give you a sense of my way of thinking, a little bit of how you should be thinking about this as best as possible. And again, some of the examples I'm going to use are contemporary, and that's because I think it's important to talk about it within a contemporary lens. But at the same time, I don't need you to do that. I don't need you. I hope my note was very clear at the beginning of the semester that you don't have to use this class as a class where you vent out your feelings. You could if you want to, as long as you're putting a sociological lens to it. That's the key to this, is wearing that sociological lens, kind of taking a step back and measuring as Mills put it, right, the distinction between what are my personal troubles and how they are affected by the greater issue, right? Understanding the issues that exist out in the bigger realm versus what I'm dealing with at the personal realm is important. And, as a sociologist, I spend a lot of time thinking about that within my own personal life. That's how it works for me. It works that in my whole entire life, everything I see through a sociological lens, which makes me not the best person to go to the movies with. You can tell my partner that they're not very, or my kids, none of them are very happy when I start digesting, well, you see, this is the problem there, and this is no one likes that, but for some reason, that's my world. I can't help it. But that's how I see things going on around me. And so sometimes it's good to use the personal. Sometimes it's good to just be completely impersonal and just look at the outside world, simply because you can get caught up in the, psychology of it, right? Your own personal psychology. Well, why did I feel this way? Why do I feel this? Oh, this is making me angry. So these are the kinds of things that you want to balance out, because after all, this is just an intro class, right? That's the one thing that we're all have to come back to, is that this is an intro class, and that this is a class that could be easily done. All of you have the ability to be able to do this class, not quite in your sleep, but half asleep. This is not, this is what makes sociology, kind of interesting. Now, you have to put it within the sociological context. That's the hard part. And that's always hard, because you want to kind of get more personal. And so let me just give you a contemporary example, right? Over the last few weeks, you've seen a lot of people complain about the things opening up. Everything should be open. Everything should be open. Everything should be open. And sometimes we sit there and say, well, you see, that's a conflict perspective. Oh, that's a functional perspective. And it's not the acts themselves that fall within a functionalist perspective or a conflict perspective or symbolic interaction is trying to see the act from a conflict or trying to see the act from a functionalist perspective. And it's not that one is one or one is the other. It's the reality that it can be seen through both perspectives. One looks at the issue of power and analyzes it from the issue of power. A lot of these people who, now there's a lot of politics involved in this and a lot of misinformation that's involved in this. But the one thing that you can look at is at least you can see that there tends to be this push, right, for normancy. And this push for normancy, which is this, open everything up, we'll deal with COVID-19 and the ramifications of COVID-19, regardless of what's going on, we'll sacrifice individuals. And so the perception of that is that somehow that the act of there being conflict makes it conflict. And no, so if you look at it from a functionalist perspective, and we're going to get to this in other settings as we move forward, you'll see this, right? What they're really doing is that they're pushing, right, on the boundaries, right? Society said, no, we don't want this, right? And then there's a margin of people who are saying, meaning that society says, no, we need to protect ourselves, we need to, separate, and we need to lock things down. And then there's a whole group of people that are saying, no, nonsense. So they're pushing on those boundaries. The question is, of course, how is that functional? Well, it's functional in the sense that, it tells us how far we're willing to let these individuals go. Right? Where is this line in our society that says this is as far as you can go and then after that it's too far? So when, for example, someone walked into the store, we've seen some clips of this, people walking to the store and being denied service because they don't have a mask on, that's the line. How do you know where that line is? Well, these people are performing a function. They're showing us where those lines are. Those individuals are very clearly showing where the lines are. Anytime you see certain videos like that, right, that are showing individuals that are pushing the limits, they're showing us, they're performing a function within our society. Now, the ramifications could be extremely problematic, right? So, and this is where race, gender, and other things come in, right? If you're African American, I would never suggest, right, trying to push some of these boundaries, because the ramification of this could be very problematic, right? We see that, right, in the number of police shootings that take place, for example, right? So we know, right, that now, does it make it right? We're not talking about what's right. We're not talking about what's wrong. Obviously, it's wrong for certain things to occur. This is not about right or wrong. This is about looking at society. And so when you see that, you can say, oh, wait a minute, there are certain individuals who can't push that far. Other individuals can push that far. Well, why is that the case, right? And now you can start breaking down the ways in which these functions exist within the society, right? How they create certain norms and certain beliefs and certain practices, right? How they fall in line with the division between troubles and issues, right? The conflict perspective would say that, no, this is an issue of power. What you have here, and depending on what type of conflict perspective you're looking at, it would look at it totally differently. It wouldn't see these people as operating as a function. They would see these people as being part of a particular group that's trying to enforce a particular power among other groups. And you could see that there's a significant amount of this, right? That there is this notion of how there is a lack of power on these individuals, of a perceived power they should have, the power to do whatever they want, and that somehow that is being taken away from them, right? And the question is, right, for those who are in real power, right, how is that being used in order to leverage their own positions within the power structure? You see how that's a little very different from the functionalist perspective? You have to understand, both sides, there's truth in both sides in a lot of ways. The thing is, right, from a sociological perspective, how you divide into a functionalist and into a conflict perspective, or conflict theorist is based on the notion of which one you believe is mostly true. Do you believe that power dominates and that the real issue is always about power conflict? Or do you believe that society is functional and everything has to do with performing functions, right, within the structures of that society? And so that makes your view of the world very distinct. That this is what makes sociologists different, right? Symbolic interactionist looks at it from individual interaction perspective. So it looks at it from starting point from an individual. So this is why it's distinct. It's a micro perspective, and while the other two are macro perspective, large perspective versus small perspective. And so they would look at the interaction at the individual level and how that creates the reality at other levels, right? And this becomes a little more complicated because now we start falling into the realm of what is real, what is not real, how do you create reality. And it isn't an issue of things not existing. It's an issue of how you identify and define things and then give them a use within that existence. A chair is great, it's used for sitting, but you could also sit on a rock. But you would never call a rock a chair. But, how would you define one versus the other? It depends on the circumstances, depends on the surrounding, depends on a lot of different things. So this is what I mean. It's not that the rock doesn't exist. That's not the case. Although I'm sure there's some philosophers out there that would make that argument. Maybe some people who are futurists who would make a different sort of argument. There are theoretical physicists who will make arguments about whether we live in a simulated reality, in which case then the rock isn't real, it's just a simulated rock. But let's assume that the rock really does exist. When we talk about, the reality of things and creating reality around us, it's about how we define these things around us. And that then determines the use of those things. And once we determine the use of those things, right, it's kind of hard to see them differently. Right? It's very difficult to change the meaning of something once you've given it a particular meaning. Right? A lot of the cultural battles that we see today involves a lot of that, right? When you look at, the notion of sexual identity and so on. What is the, this is how it should be, this is how it is, this is how it was. And it's very difficult to see, something in between or something different, define things differently. And you see that going on. So that's how a symbolic interactionist might want to look at how people interact with each other and how they create the social world around them. It's a very different perspective, and it comes from the bottom up. But I'm hoping that at some level you can start seeing some of the significance of this, right? If we really start thinking about it. But it's a different perspective from functionalists, and it's a different perspective from conflict. Now, neither of these outright reject that some elements of this exist. They don't work together. These are very different ways of viewing the world, because ultimately there is one, right, depending on your perspective, that is seen as primary. Whether you're a functionalist, whether you're a conflict theorist, or whether you're a symbolic interactionist. It becomes, now there's a lot of sub-theories involved in this and a lot of theories that have variated from this. Feminist theory is very much clicked into conflict perspective. Critical race theory is very much linked into the functionalist perspective. So there's all these things that are going on. But I want you to understand that kind of, as a sociologist, first of all, as a student in an intro to sociology class, you just have to understand that there are these different perspectives. You have to understand that these different perspectives guide the way in which they see the world around them. The primary way. It's not an outright rejection, but it's a primary way in which they see the world around them. And finally, I wanted to at least give you a chance to kind of hear my voice, see what it is that I'm kind of like, how I think about this class, how you could personalize things in the class, and I'm very open to that, but that you really need to take into account the notion of trouble versus issues and try to take that step back and place it within that sociological way of thinking. Remember, this is an intro class. This is not meant to be one that's going to solve the world around you. The idea of the promise of sociology from Mills was really that it gives you some sort of grounded perspective in a world that is very complicated, where things occur that you don't know what's going on. You can't see this virus. You can't make sense of it. You just see symptoms, and then you see what ramifications of those symptoms, right? That's what we're seeing in individuals who get sick. So we can't tell, we can't see it, we don't understand for the most part how it actually works. And by the way, I don't mean that as in lay persons not understanding how it works, although that in and of itself its own issue. I'm talking about there are scientists out there who are trying to work out, right, the process of how this works, how it infects the body, how it goes in, how it connects, how it creates the symptoms that it does, why it creates the symptoms that it does. So there's a lot of things out there that we don't know, we don't understand. And so the question is, right, how do we position ourselves within that lack of understanding, right? We're human beings in this small little planet, and it's a huge universe. It's, when you think about it that way, it's so easy to just get lost in the, outside, everything that's so much bigger than us. So what this promise is supposed to do is give you a little peek at being able to understand how you belong, right? How are you a part of this society? How do you contribute to this society? What is your position within the society? What does it mean to be part of this society? That's the idea behind it. It's not going to, answer all your questions. Hopefully it'll create a lot of questions on your end, and eventually you want to pursue them. In either case, I hope this class works out for you guys. And again, if there's any issues or anything like that, please let me know.